Alright, the next step on this epoxy project for this battleship is currently sitting in front of me. Let me show you. So, I got about, that right there is just a little over, oh, it's right about 3/4 of an inch. I don't want to pour the full thing in one pour. I'm going to do multiple pours on this. So instead of pouring 3/4, I'm going to do half of that, which is just in between 7/8 and a half inch. So I'm going to go right about 7/8 of an inch to pour on this. What I did was I took a sandpaper, I scuffed up the surface here, and I'll explain to you why I did that. The reason is, if this is the top layer with the current epoxy and you pour liquid epoxy on top, it's just going to sit on top. Yes, they're touching, but it's not a real strong bond between the two surfaces. So by scuffing up the bottom one with 220 grit sandpaper, what you do is you kind of open the top layer and creates these pores. And then when you pour the liquid epoxy, instead of it just sitting on the top surface, it gets down into the grooves of the scratches, and what that does is it creates a good mechanical bond between the two layers that's already hardened and then the liquid that's poured on top. So if you look right here, I got some clear epoxy ready to go. It is pretty warm. I'm just gonna make sure it's up to temperature, and we are sitting 96 degrees, pretty good. I like to try to get it between 90 and 95. It's 1 over, so I'm just gonna do one last stir, and I'm just gonna pour this in there, one thin layer, and then we're going to let this cure overnight, and then tomorrow I will pour the next layer, and once I pour that next layer, then I'll let that cure, and it should be done and ready to get pulled out of the mold, so I can trim the edges and surface everything. And then I'm actually going to, there's a bunch of little micro bubbles right here, but I poured it pretty thick, so I scratched it up so I know that it's an area that I need to pay attention to. So when I pour the next pour, I'm going to go just to the edge right here and leave that open. So I'm going to address that, and then it's going to be right here, and I'm going to cut the edges off. I'm going to scrape that down. Then when I get all of it trimmed up, I'll do one more final coat, a real thin coat, just to cover the entire surface as one flood coat over the entire thing. But let's pour. Get all this off the stick here. Now I measured for 7/8 of an inch, but I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be ½ inch by the time we get done, actually gets done pouring, which is okay. It's just a little bit over. You always want to pour more than what you plan to do, so you can have access. But you see how it looks all fuzzy and cloudy right now? Just watch this as I pour the epoxy over it. You'll see what happens. It kind of blends in real clear. You see that, how it cleared up? Look up here by the flag. Watch the flag. Yeah, it clears up because the epoxy gets down in those pores, and when it does, it just gets rid of those scratch marks, basically. Look at that. It's like bringing that blue back to life. Oh, that 35. Look at that. Pour a little more down here. And the other reason I'm pouring a little more is because that little crevice, if you look, the way this mold is set up, it has this gap so epoxy gets into the back. Because you're going to trim that off anyway. So, it's alright. Oh. There you go. This is the next layer. And it's going to self-level, and by the time it runs down the channels to the back of the board, it's actually going to be a little bit lower than what it is right now. Well, let me scrape the rest of this out, but you can see the depth in there. And as I wait for this thing to start to gum up, aka cure, I'm going to be coming through here and popping the bubbles with a heat source, and I have my little torch that I like to use. Let's pour this on here, get that off. Alright, that should do. That's literally every little bit of epoxy right there. I just use the edge of that, and then it's done. This bucket's done. And so if you look here, that's the next layer. It's kind of hard to tell. You look on the corner, you can tell me, zoom in. So yeah, that poured about what I was expecting it to. I was expecting to go about halfway up that board, and if you look at the exposed wood, it's above the blue, it's about halfway up. It's kind of hard to tell in this because you can't tell what's wood grain and what's epoxy. Unless you had a reflection of a light, you can see what the light's actually reflection off the epoxy there. But let's pop bubbles. So I'm just going to go through here. So you can see some bubbles here. We're just going to... Whoa! Somebody turned my torch up. That's still too much. You don't want a lot of heat. You will burn epoxy. It does burn. You see those pop? You just sweep the surface actually a little bit more right here. So I'll just kind of go there, hit these edges real quick. Even if there's not bubbles there that I can't see, I'll still pop it anyway, because there might be micro bubbles that are out of my view. I still pop them anyway. You see the smoke coming off there? That's because I left it on there too long and it started to burn. But I was able to catch it pretty quickly and move it away so that epoxy does not burn. If you burn epoxy, it turns yellow. And with it being in this fresh pour, like right away, you could save it by simply just putting a stick in there, a toothpick or a popsicle stick or something, and just pulling it out, because it will gum up and get real hard, or not real hard, but really gummy. So you can just put your stick in there and pull it up, and you can just pull the burnt piece out. Alright, so there we go. Got this nice and popped. And I'll come back and check it every 10 minutes for the next 30 minutes or so. So 3 or 4 times over the next hour, just to pop bubbles again. But it's looking really clear. Look at that. I mean, this should not overheat. If it does, I got my friend here, alcohol, 99%. I know it's not properly labeled, but I know what's in this bottle. You just come back and you just spray it, and this, 1, pops bubbles, but 2, it also cools it off too. That way it doesn't overheat. And I knew that, but I didn't want to pour it on clear on the damaged one that failed. If you haven't seen that video, go watch it. It's like a 3-minute video. That was pretty sad because I got done with everything. It's like, oh, it's looking good, and then the next day there was a big old crack right through it, and I was pretty ticked. But that was a deep cast pour. That was a real thick pour. These are thin pours, so they don't heat up as much as something that's a lot thicker. Think of a piece of metal that's this thick. It's going to stay warm for a while compared to something that's about this thick. It'll cool off a lot quicker because it's a lot thinner and it can't retain that heat for as long as something thicker can. And that's what epoxy does as well. I just didn't think that it would heat up that much. But yeah, so there it is. It's going to look pretty good. What do y'all think about it? I can't wait to finish it up. It's going to look great.